Hello, everyone. Welcome to I am not Mary Jo Webster, obviously, but hi, my name is Richard. I'm a research assistant at the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis. And just want to do a very, very quick plug. Some of you may have already seen, but the bank is putting on an event for undergrads to try to engage, exceptional undergrads who are interested in quantitative social science. Hint, hint, that means like outside of econ majors. So we're trying to engage social science students at the U. And if any of you know anyone who might be a good fit, this is undergrads of any grade, please forward them my way. Um, Hopefully you received the email from Kathy and Lindsay, but if not, I'll write my email up there in case you're interested. And it's an opportunity next Friday for undergrads to come to the bank, listen to a seminar, and talk to some of the economists. Okay, thank you.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm Sarah Flood. I'm the director of the Life Course Center. Thanks for being here today. We have a couple of quick announcements. First, on Friday, we're hosting a PAA abstract review. So this is just a chance to work together and give feedback on abstract submissions and receive feedback. So please come with a draft abstract, and the deadline to submit is October 5th. And then also, grad students, mark your calendar for Friday, October 3rd from 2 to 3:15 for an online information session on interdisciplinary doctoral fellowship program details. If you want to learn about that program and potentially apply, you should go to the info session. Lindsay will be there. Yes, there's a flyer over here with lots of information. Both LCC and MPC have IDFs this year. And so we'd like to keep that going. So go learn about the program and apply. We're also excited to announce the new LCC pilots for the upcoming year. We have two based here at the University of Minnesota. One is Caitlin Carroll and Thomas Helgerman, who will be working on the long-run impact of medical school construction on the geographic distribution of physicians and health outcomes. And then Christian Marcon received one of our new highly innovative or time-sensitive grants for examining early psychosocial predictors of epigenetic aging using longitudinal data from adoptive and non-adoptive families. You can find more information on these pilots as well as the two pilots outside of Minnesota and on the program in general. If you have any questions about the pilot program, please reach out to Jeanette or me or Gina or Sue Everson Rose. It's going to be a really fantastic pilot grant program. So now my job is to introduce Mateo Frumholt, who is a population health trainee here at Iserdy and a graduate student in the Division of Health Policy and Management in the School of Public Health.
Thank you. And I have the pleasure of introducing Mary Jo Webster, who is an incredible storyteller and data journalist here in Minnesota. She studied journalism at the University of Missouri Columbia and has since reported for USA Today, the St. Paul Pioneer Press, and now as the data editor for the Minnesota Star Tribune. Many of her works have won many awards, including two pieces on criminal justice system that were finalists for the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journaling, for investigative reporting. Sorry, and Mary Jo has recently been working on stories related to Minnesota's educational system, which I think a lot of us are really interested in, for which she won the National Headliner Award this year. It's so great to welcome you, to have you here to learn more about what data journalism practice looks like. I am very fortunate to give you the very coveted NPC mug, which you can only get by presenting here. So let's welcome Mary Jo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here today. Thank you so much. I spent so much time trying to think about what I wanted to talk about today because there's about 20 different directions I could have gone. I hope this works. So here we go. So I've been a journalist for just over 30 years. I have both bachelor's and master's in journalism. My time at Mizzou was getting a master's degree. But I've been a specialist in what's called data journalism for the last 25 years. And with most of that at the Pioneer Press or the Star Tribune. I also taught at the U's Hubbard School of Journalism for about 10 years as an adjunct. So quite a bit of time on this campus too. So what does a data journalist or data, my official title is data editor. It's, what is it, right? It's actually confusing and vague for a lot of people, including some of my colleagues, if you can believe that or not. So data journalism is a specialty area of journalism. It's kind of relatively new, as I'll get into a little bit. But we are journalists first, but we're also trained in how to analyze data using various tools such as spreadsheets, Python, R, GIS software. The tools, of course, are increasing lately. Some are data journalists like myself do this full time, like that's our focus, and I'll tell you more about that. But those jobs are relatively rare in the news industry. We don't have like what are called beats. We can cover any topic under the sun, and we usually end up spending a lot of our time helping beat reporters with their own storytelling and putting our data skills to work. Um, but you could also say there are also beat reporters out there who have data skills who just don't have the title of data journalist because they don't do it full time. Does that make sense? Like their focus is on the beat reporting. At the Star Tribune, I run a small team of data journalists. There's 2 others on my team. We're small but mighty. So I end up doing a combination of player coach kind of work. Sometimes I am doing my own analysis, maybe even my own writing. More often, I'm partnering with a reporter on something, such as we did a series last year on charter schools that won the Headliner Award. I was paired up with 2 other reporters on that. But then I also spend a lot of time overseeing the work that my 2 teammates are doing, and then just talking to other reporters and editors in the room to find out, well, what are you covering? What's your story? What's the big story? What questions do you have that the humans are not answering? And where can we maybe bring data into the mix to do that work? So this is the top portion of our teams. We have a little charter in the newsroom to help the rest of the room understand what we do. So we just got a new editor a few months ago, so we gave her a copy of this right away. But the key thing here is that we combine traditional reporting with data analysis, programming, and other specialized skills to report and tell stories that would not be possible otherwise. That's the big thing. Is like usually the data we use is making it possible for the story to happen. And this could be anything: investigative stories, small and mid-sized, what we call enterprise stories, but also non-narrative formats, such as some kind of interactive thing for our website. And I'll show you some examples of those. So it's really all over the road, and we could be working on any topic. There's some days where I literally jump from 5 different topics in the same day, crossing such a huge, wide swath of things. It's kind of crazy. I can't really become an expert in any one thing. So I like to think of our work as interviewing data. Data is a source, just like the humans. It can often answer questions that the humans either can't or don't want to. And it can provide, but it can also provide a lot more detail and help us really understand a topic that we're writing about. Of course, we try whenever possible to get detailed data, not just the summary numbers that a lot of government agencies publish on their websites or in reports. And how many of you have seen the Tableau dashboards they all seem to have these days? We try to go deeper than that. Unfortunately, we run up against the privacy laws, and there's a lot of data we can't get. At the same time, we don't qualify for a lot of the researcher kind of arrangements that you guys can probably get because we're a for-profit entity. They shut us down and won't let us do that. So we're stuck in this kind of middle ground, and sometimes we can't get the level of detail we'd really love to get. And there's many days I wish I was in your shoes rather than mine for that reason. But like I said, we could do any topic under the sun. We spend a lot of time, though, on more hard news kind of stories because our role of being able to watchdog government is really crucial, especially at the Star Tribune. And that's where we, with our data skills, can have the biggest impact. So our minimal resources, that's where it tends to go first. But then when we have more time, we might be doing sports related things and getting data from the NBA or the NFL or something like that. We do get a lot of real estate data that is from a private entity. So there's occasionally we can do that. Sometimes we build our own data sets. I'll talk about a couple of those that we've done. I thought I'd tell you my favorite data sets. We were just talking about one of them. My all-time favorite is Minnesota's public death certificate data set. We are one of the only states in the nation that allows that access to that data. It's absolutely incredible. I work with journalists all over the country who are just floored that we can get that. And I will go to my death trying to make sure that that never gets shut down for us, because I have found it incredibly useful for so many things across so many different topics. We always find a use for it. Of course, like American Community Survey or other demographic data, we spend a lot of time with that. I also love education data. I spend a ton of time with K through 12 enrollment. I even figured out how to use that for a sports story, believe it or not, right? Like it's useful. So lots of things. So let me show you a few examples of the work that as a data journalist and how that kind of plays out. Um, in our last meeting, someone asked what was my favorite story ever. This is my favorite story ever that I've ever worked on in my 30 years. And I don't know that I'll ever top it, quite honestly. So this was a 9-part project we published in 2018 called Denied Justice. It started probably in 2016 when a reporter named Brandon Stahl came to me and said, what percentage of sex assault cases reported to the police actually result in a court conviction? Is there data that measures that? We spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, and the answer is no. Nobody collects that data and measures it through the course of that span. The police track their stuff and what happens on their end, and the county attorney and the court tracks their stuff on that end. In between is a giant gulf where data goes to die. So we decided to get investigative police reports from 20 different police agencies. It ended up being a representative sample of cases across these 20 agencies, and read all of these reports, which was difficult, and then built our own database tracking not only what happened to the case, did it go to the prosecutor, did it get charges filed, did it result in a conviction, but then we also tracked what did the police do or not do. And we ultimately chose some very, very simple things like, did an investigator interview the victim? Did they interview a named suspect when they had one? Did they interview all the potential witnesses who were mentioned in the report? Really simple 101 policing things. The sad news is, like half the time they didn't do those things. And only about 8% of cases resulted in a conviction. So we paired that data analysis. Here's the key finding. It was 7% in this story. We actually published this story before we were completely finished building the data set because it took so long. It took us over 18 months to build the data set. But ultimately, these held up all the way through. So anyways, we paired this data analysis, and the data analysis really became what I consider the spine of the story. It really held the story up. When you read the first story in particular, this is all you see of the data, just like 3 paragraphs, and then the data is not there. It's not visible in the story. The rest of it is these women these women telling their stories. And policymakers told us that when they saw this powerful data showing the systemic problem paired with these women telling their heartbreaking stories, that it was impossible for them to turn away and not do anything. And the Attorney General launched a task force immediately before we even finished publishing all 9 stories. And they came out with their report the following year, and it was pretty much the whole thing was the Star Tribune was right, the Star Tribune was right, the Star Tribune was right. But then we had over 100 women come forward by the end of it, wanting to tell their story, and we got many of them together at the state capitol to take a picture. on a really cold December day, and so many of them were just coming up to us saying, "You helped me heal. I thought I was the only one who was badly treated by police, and to hear all these other stories helped me heal." And that was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my career. And then a few years later, the legislature came through and rewrote a lot of the state sex assault laws, fixing some of the loopholes that we uncovered. And then we were a finalist for the Pulitzer too, all those things. But hearing those women was so much better. And Brandon had written a story about one woman in particular, a U of M student, in fact, who was badly treated by police. That they literally believed the fraternity brothers lying instead of believing her, and they closed the case. He wrote that story before we did this, and her story went nowhere. It was one woman, right, telling the story, and that was nothing for the policymakers. They needed this data, and nobody was measuring this. So us measuring it led to change. And this is the epitome of this story would not have been possible without the data. This is what I aim for all the time. Unfortunately, I don't get to work on these big things all the time. So I have other things I have to work on. So last month, after the shooting at Annunciation Church in school, we scrambled to find, we knew where all this data was, data on mass shootings and school shootings in particular, to be able to put out a story, putting that incident in context and how this has become such an enormous problem in recent years. So we scramble on things like that pretty regularly. I like to think of it as putting the story into giving it the context it needs using data. We do a lot of that. During COVID, we were front and center. Most read story on the Star Tribune's website ever was our COVID tracker. I don't think anybody will ever break that number. I don't know the number offhand, but I don't think anybody will ever break that number. I think my former colleague Mike Corey is on the Zoom call. He was behind this in the early days. The image here is our final iteration before we shut it down in 2022. But we went through several iterations, and people like Mike just killed themselves to update this every single day as a public service that the state wasn't doing at that time. So we look for these opportunities to if we need to track something ourselves or like make sure readers can see what's happening with data. And so this was a service to the readers, but then we had this rich data set that we could then use for our own reporting. And so, this is where I pulled in the death certificate data as well, and then the case data at the same time. And we could marry things together, demographic data with the case data and the death data to see where there was disparities geographically and by racial groups and things like that. And so it helps us data can help us find these kinds of stories that maybe we wouldn't do otherwise, or that a reporter might not even think to do because they don't have what I call the data state of mind. We think about what can data tell us, what can we tell from it, right? And so there's a lot of things like that. I spend a lot of time using demographic data. The Minnesota Population Center, and particularly IPMS and NHGIS, are two of my go-tos. I've had a login for like 20 some years, and I love the please only use this for good, never for evil. It's my favorite thing ever. This is a story I did using IPMS data, looking at how Minnesota has a negative domestic migration rate. And there's been this myth all along that we just lose retirees. They move south, right? Well, no, we lose college kids. They go off to college and they pretty much don't come back. And that was the big thing I was able to take using IPMS data. So not very many journalists have data skills for a couple reasons. One is that a lot of journalists think of data as being math. They connect it as math. And they say, I went into journalism because I wanted to avoid math. I don't want to do anything with math. Well, we deal with numbers all the time. I can pull up the Star Tribune's website and guarantee you I can find at least a dozen stories published just in the last 24 hours that all have numbers in them somewhere or another, in some way or another. And the fact that we have journalists who don't want to deal with numbers is a problem. We also, just have data journalism has not been a big thing in colleges. It's not a requirement. It's at every school I know of, it's an elective. So not all reporters come out with those skills. Um, I do have to confess that I'm one of those people who hated math in high school. Believe it or not, I avoided it at all costs in college. I think the class I took in college, I remembered the one thing I remember learning is how to play billiards because it's geometry, right? I know, isn't that crazy? But over the years, I've come to realize that really when you're doing data analysis, it's more, especially the work we do, is more like a foreign language than it is math. Because we're just learning how to interpret, translate our English questions into whatever software, whether I'm writing a program in R or doing formulas in a spreadsheet. What's that translation to speak to the computer to get it to ask those questions? And, we're doing math, yes, counting, summing, averages. We often don't we rarely get into more advanced than that. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I have gotten more advanced, but we don't. It's more often counting and summing and the kind of math we all learned in like fourth grade. So it should be something we can all do, right? Um, I will also point out that a lot of us, including me, don't have very much formal data analysis training. As I said, journalism schools don't really have those programs. And so a lot of us learned from each other. We go to conferences and learn from each other. So it's kind of learn as you go. I actually learned R while doing denied justice. So I needed to have a replicable analysis, and I realized R would be the best way to do that. So I was literally learning it as I was going, and that it gave me some incentive. So when I was in college at River Falls, data journalism was actually in its infancy, and I don't think my professors even knew that it was a thing. I know I never heard about it. So um, when I left college, I went and worked at the Duluth News Tribune for a while as an intern, hoping to stay on. Didn't get it. Then I went to New Ulm in January of 1995 and worked at the New Ulm Journal. My beat was I jokingly call it the Little House on the Prairie beat because I covered everything from Sleepy Eye to Walnut Grove. Um, Nothing very exciting. All of my up until that point, all my journalism training was really focused on which humans should we talk to. Your Rolodex was the most important thing, and so many of the stories that we did were reactionary. We depended on someone else, something from a survey or a press release or whatever. I was writing a lot of what I'd call fluff pieces like this one. I went and pulled this. Notice it's the newspaper version because it was not online back then. There's something about some local businesses giving students deals for having good grades in high school. Today, that story would probably never happen. We don't have enough resources to do those kinds of stories. A couple of years later, I was at the Oshkosh Northwestern, and I was covering public safety, including like the police department and the sheriff. And one day, probably late 96 or 97, I was doing a story about the city police department and how their proposed budget was dramatically higher than the year before. So I was sitting there with a calculator trying to calculate percent change for all the departments in the city. And a colleague of mine saw what I was doing and he came over and he said, "Do you know what Microsoft Excel is?" And I was like, "No." And he showed me, pulled it up on my computer and showed me a spreadsheet, showed me how to punch it in. I just made this up the other day, by the way. Punch in the numbers and do the percent change calculation and drag it down. And I was like, wow, oh my God, that is amazing. But then he told me that he had learned it as part of investigative reporting training, that this is where it had started. And ever since I had learned about Watergate, I was very passionate about this idea of watchdogging government, giving voice to the voiceless, all these ideas, right? And that was where I wanted to get myself at some point in my career. And sitting there at the Oshkosh Northwestern, I had no idea how I was going to get there. And so this was kind of intriguing. And I thought, I'm going to do this. So back then, it was called computer assisted reporting. It's the most crappy name ever on the face of the earth. And my business card actually from 10 years ago still says computer assisted reporting editor on it. But really in the last 10 years, we've bailed from that and we just call it data journalism. Thank goodness. This is a book that we all learned from basically. Um, so I quickly learned that CAR, computer assisted reporting, was a staple of investigative reporting. And I also learned that use I had it for, which was basically using a spreadsheet as a fancy calculator, that there was so much more that I could do than that. So you know, I arrived in doing car work, data work around 1999, and it was still a really crucial time in its development. The idea of journalists doing their own analysis was still very new, and it was not very widespread. Um, it had really kind of begun mainly in the 80s when investigative reporters realized government agencies no longer have filing cabinets full of paper. They have mainframes full of data. What are we going to do if we want to look at their information? We need to know how to process the data. So, and this was all happening at the same time that personal computers were just coming into the newsrooms as well. So a lot of journalists like myself really couldn't start doing this until we got Windows-based computers. And a lot of newsrooms had things like this, a dumb terminal. And my first two jobs, I did have a dumb terminal where um, the one I had in New Ulm, in fact, I know it didn't do spell check even, and it would occasionally freeze up. And what you did is you pulled the cord out the back, blew the dust out of the power cord, and plugged it back in, and hopefully it would come back. But there was nothing much we could do. And even that story I just told you about learning Excel in Oshkosh, I'm pretty sure we had just gotten Windows-based computers within a few months of that. Like it was brand new, which explains why I didn't know Excel was on my computer, maybe, right? I'll use that as an excuse. Also, the annual conference dedicated to data journalism, which is short for, it's called NICAR, the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting. We just call it NICAR now, even though that had started in '93. And by the time I started going in 1999, it had really started to blossom. So it was really just starting to pick up at that point. This conference was just here in Minneapolis last March, if any of you recall. It was very exciting to have everyone here in my hometown. The real pioneer of data journalism, though, is this guy named Phil Meyer. In 1966, he was a Nieman Fellow, and he studied social science research techniques and some computer science skills. He wanted to better understand the new ways that political consultants were manipulating voters back in 1966, right? And he realized that reporters could use these same quantitative data analysis techniques to measure social patterns. And right after he finished his fellowship, it was the summer of 1967, and Detroit had 5 days of riots. And his company sent him to the Detroit Free Press to help with coverage after this. And he proposed there was a theory that that all the rioters were poor Black people that were out rioting, and Phil was skeptical of that. So were other people. And so Phil proposed a survey of what he called attitudes and grievances in the riot area. USC faculty had just published their own survey from the 1965 Watts riots. So it had taken 2 years for them to do that survey. And Phil's editors were like, "We love this idea, but you can't take 2 years to do it. How much time do you need?" And Phil said, "Give me 3 weeks." He pulled it off, believe it or not. He recruited a friend from graduate school and another person who were both researchers at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. They used an IBM 360, which I'm pretty sure is a big mainframe that looks like that picture on your wall over here. Pretty sure. I know he had to use punch cards to do the crosstabs and perform chi-square tests. And ultimately, he, just like the USC survey, debunked that riffraff theory. Income and education were not factors were not predictive of riot participation. That's how he worded it. So Phil went on to continue doing that kind of survey work for various news organizations for a number of years, if not decades. Um, and he spent his later years teaching at the University of North Carolina. And I was extremely lucky to get to take a week-long statistics training with him back in the year 2000. He died a couple years ago. And we, of course, you know, praised, he's really we consider him our grandfather of data journalism. His book, if you guys want to read something, here you go. It's still considered required reading, even though the last edition was published in 2002. It's still available. I checked on Amazon. You can still get it. And he really brought out this idea that what we do as journalists is the same as a scientist. We're doing the same work. So when I first started, in 1999, a data journalist with advanced skills was someone who knew SQL, structured query language, or maybe they could work with GIS software. That was kind of the top end of the skill curve. This was the first data journalism piece to win a Pulitzer Prize. It was in 1989. They used Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data to prove racial disparities in mortgage lending, which we know is very much a thing, right? And that data set still exists today, but back then he probably would have used SQL for that, and that would have been a really high-end analysis back then. Fancy schmancy, right? Today, the high end of data journalism is very, very different, and we have an award named after Phil Meyer that honors this kind of work. These are the two pieces that were first and second place in this year's contest. I thought I'd show them to give you an idea of just how advanced it has gotten. So the Bloomberg News piece won the award, and the way it was described is they found a handful of companies that learned to game the H-1B visa program, bringing in people to work, high-end people to work in the U.S., right? They used statistical analysis to cut through 1.8 million applications, allowing them to document a story that would not have been possible. In one instance, they found a network of staffing firms linked to an Indian politician that applied for visas for the same people and took a cut of their salaries when they won the lottery. They used analysis of anomalies to lead them to an algorithm that eventually identified about 3,500 staffing firms registered under multiple names. In all, the effort allowed Bloomberg to document a system that had previously been known only as whispers in the IT community. So, I mean, finding all these companies with multiple different names in 1.8 million records, that would not have been at all possible back in 1989, right? The second one, this is one of my favorite pieces that I've seen come out in a long time. The Center for Public Integrity and some partners spent 2.5 years looking at the history and consequences of the 40 acres and a mule, the one attempt the U.S. has ever made on reparations for American slavery. The main thing that is just stunning is they trained an AI model to search digitized Freedmen's Bureau records. So these things were digitized, but not really indexed in any way. So they were just images. And they needed to figure out which of the images were land titles that had been given to former slaves and which were some other documents. And the AI model helped them find over 1,200 land titles in that data set is also millions, if not bigger. It was a huge data set. And then they were able to follow what happened with that land. In many cases, the land was taken back and taken away from the Black families. Really great. And this included online stories and a podcast, and it's amazing if you want to go take a look. So again, AI, I was saying that SQL was the top end. We're now getting to a point where AI is the top end, and using various large language models and other algorithms to weed through these are the perfect examples, weeding through huge piles of data. And this is where we're moving. Not very many of us have AI skills, though, including me. I need to get up to speed. So as you can probably figure out, what we do is a lot of similar to what an academic researcher does. It looks very, very similar, but we just operate on much shorter timelines, much shorter, and we need to write for the layperson. And as I mentioned earlier, we have some limitations on data access. Um, so I learned quite a bit about this kind of uh, the difference between journalism and an academic paper with this project that I published in 2021. And Mike Corey, I believe, is on the call. He was my colleague at the time and worked with me on this. We collected GIS zoning files for more than 100 cities in the Twin Cities and built our own database tracking how much residential land is zoned for only single family homes. The city of Minneapolis had just passed its comprehensive plan outlining single family zoning. And at the time, the city said it was roughly 70% of their residential land was single family only. I wondered how, if we measured the whole metro, what would that percentage be? But nobody, again, like denied justice, nobody was tracking this. Nobody, because every city had their own zoning rules. So I had to collect all these GIS files. Thank God for Mike Corey. He wrangled them for me and put them all together. And ultimately, we did. There's a lot of my reporting bore out all kinds of things. This affects housing affordability. It affects the environment because we've locked ourselves into a car-dependent culture. And there was a lot of talk that it perpetuates segregation. These rules have been put in place after black-white zoning rules had been deemed illegal. This was the way that policymakers had of preventing Black people from moving into their neighborhoods. So we decided to answer the question of whether is zoning perpetuating that racial segregation that was instituted from so many years of other things, other zoning, racial covenants, housing discrimination, all those things. Was it still locking us into that? But so for this one, I paired up with a researcher from George Mason University he's an economist, but he specializes in housing analysis and in this, particularly this housing affordability and this whole housing level. And we worked together to do a regression analysis to try to prove that uh, perpetuating racial segregation. So we use census data at the Black group level. We got our zoning down to that Black group level. What was that zoning in that Black group predominantly? And then doing the analysis, I leaned heavily on him because regression is not my thing. Remember, I said I don't do math. That's where having him, we spent many an hour on a Zoom call with an R script going through the analysis and checking our results and everything. But if you go read this story, you will not find a mention of a regression analysis. The way we presented the results and everything is in layperson's terms. The regression is there to it is the spine, and it's there for us to feel confident in what we wrote, being able to write authoritatively. That we do have a methodology published separately, and you can see all of that in there. That all the details about the regression are in there, but our readers would just be they would be zoned out, so we didn't do it. But then after, Salim and I partnered together to publish a paper in the Housing Policy Debate Journal. And I got to see firsthand the process of editing an academic paper. Holy cow, I thought journalism editing was tough. This was insane. I don't know how you guys do it, but anyways, so I am a published author. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So throughout my career, I've reached out to experts like Salim when I'm working on something that requires a little more sophisticated analysis. We also lean on experts, topic area experts. Like denied justice, we had a team of 13 criminal justice experts that we leaned heavily on. The zoning piece, in addition to Salim, we talked to Ed Getz here at the U of M and some others to try to make sure we were going in the right direction. So we do a lot of that kind of informal help kind of thing from topic experts or analysis experts. This is one I've done a few times where I run a linear regression on school test scores with school poverty to see, and mainly we're looking for what schools are doing better than would be expected, particularly the schools up here This is poverty. That's percent proficient on school test scores. Which ones are doing better than expected, particularly in the high poverty schools? And we find schools that are beating the odds, is what we call it. And when we go reach out to them, they're like, "Oh my God, thank you for recognizing that we are doing good. Yeah, we're not scoring like Edina over here, but we're way above where we should be, and we call that a win." And they love when we do that. And so this is the 2023 version. I'm actually getting ready to publish a new version of this, and I've been getting help from a stats professor at St. Thomas um, to check my work and make sure I didn't miss something. And just last week, she gave me the green light, said I'm good to go with the new version. So stay tuned. That one will be coming shortly. Um, uh, so, as I said, when I first started out, SQL was probably the high end. Did any of you ever use FoxPro? That's the first programming language I learned. It's a SQL language, but you can write code. I wrote code to process the 2000 census data in FoxPro. I don't know how we did that, but we did. But the tools that are being used right now in the data journalism world are some sort of spreadsheets. SQL is becoming less because of R. A lot of people are using R. Python kind of coming in second. And then QGIS is probably the big one on the mapping side because we don't have money to buy licenses anymore. Increasingly, they're going away, right? We're seeing the universities that do have really good data journalism programs are starting to reach the point where they're not teaching spreadsheets first. They go straight to R or maybe Python. Increasingly, I see R. And as a result, we're starting to get students coming out who are way more skilled. And a lot of them are in college preparing to be a data journalist, which I didn't do. And so they're taking computer science classes or minoring in computer science as well. And so the skill level we're getting at among the younger people is just mind blowing. I had an intern this summer who I think could have run circles around me. Tried really hard to hire her. I'm still going to keep trying one of these days. Um, when as I mentioned, data journalism positions kind of evolved from investigative teams. Usually there was like a data journalist on an investigative team. That's how my job was originally crafted. Starting in about the 2000s, we started seeing teams pop up in newsrooms, particularly the bigger ones. But with the industry the way it is, not all companies have been able to keep those teams. And but we've also seen changing roles. So I kind of fall under data analysis, like that is my specialty. But there's people who specialize in data visualization, or maybe they're more of an engineer developer, building kind of those interactive backend things on our website. And there are some people who are a straight up data editor. They just oversee a team and they just manage the team, and that's all they do. So we've started to see this kind of separation of duties rather than a data journalist having to do everything in a newsroom, which is how I started. Unfortunately, data journalism hasn't grown as much as it should because of the dire financial straits of the industry. If you're not aware, this is share of employment, and this is newspaper publishers, the blue line. And the internet publishing, of course, is not keeping up at all. So we've seen a lot of data journalism jobs cut at places. Smaller news organizations generally don't have them. The LA Times, for example, has like 2 people, I think, right now. Seattle Times has 1. Boston Globe has 3, like we do. They're doing fairly well, like we are. But that's not enough. Even the New York Times hasn't been able to maintain a team. So the whole newspaper industry we've lost 77% of the jobs over the last in my career, basically, and it's really shocking. Um, uh, I don't know how much you guys know about this, but classified ads were the gravy train for newspapers. Craigslist blew that out of the water, and then the internet, just kept going and blowing all kinds of things out of the water for us. So this has been especially harsh at smaller publications. Like this is the building at Oshkosh where I worked. To kind of show you the scope of this change when I was there in the late 90s. We probably had at least 20 reporters, I think, with separate departments for news, features, sports, business. On the main floor was the printing press. Every day they would fire up that press and the whole building would shake, right? This is their staff directory right now. 2 people. Yeah. This is about as close to a ghost newspaper as you can get, where it's being filled with content written by people from somewhere else, not people in the community. And they don't have that building anymore. They don't use that printing press. Their papers printed elsewhere. Just 2 weeks ago, we announced we're shutting down our press at the Star Tribune, and the paper is going to be printed in Des Moines, Iowa, and shipped up here via truck in the middle of the night. So what's going to happen is that we have to finish our stories for print, uh, written, edited, put on the page, all of it by 5 p.m. every day. That means the print newspaper will not be current. It'll be more of a magazine, featurey stuff. It just won't. This is the way, and we are late to this game. Most other newspapers have already done this. We're one of the last. So very depressing. The move to digital, though, has been very beneficial to data journalism in the respect that we have a better platform to present our stuff. My first data journalism stories were, a couple paragraphs with my findings and a graphic or two. Now we can put up searchable databases, interactive things. This one we just published a week or so ago, where you can look up your school district and see how much in-out there is from open enrollment and kids living in that district but going off to charter schools or something like that. And readers love these. Our average story gets about 2,000 to 3,000 what we call sessions. So like if you come back to it 2 times, that's 2 sessions. This one got 20,000 sessions in 1 week. So hugely successful, right? We also like to do fun things like this one. I don't know if it'll let me bring it up or not. I'm not going to try. Ooh, is it letting me bring it up? Ah, it's over here. I bet because I can't see the screen. I'm going to go back. Can I go back? No, I can't go back. I didn't foresee this. You can get me back? Oh, I see. I think you just have to click on the other tab over there. Anyways, I was going to say, this thing, you pick where you grew up and what year you were born, and then it tells you, like, it has a whole series of things. It was snowier when you were a kid. It was warmer. It was rainier in the summer, or whatever. And it's all built on historical weather data, but it's just a fun little thing and allows us to do. So we can do all kinds of things with data. This would not have been possible in print. Readers love this stuff too. So it's not as I don't know. It's not hard news, but we like to have fun sometimes. So I am at past time. It's time for Q&A. What do you guys got for me?
I have to imagine. Well, thank you for this presentation. Super cool. I have to imagine that a lot of the data that you're working with is really, really messy because it's administrative data, it's old records. How do you deal with that?
Well, we try to clean if we can. Like I had one data set where the name Minneapolis was spelled like 20 different ways. So we have some tools for standardizing things like that. There's another data set about high-speed chases in Minnesota where the reporter said, hey, I covered this one really high-profile case where this pedestrian was killed. Is that one in the database? And we're like, no, it's not in here. The agency said, yeah, it's supposed to be in there, but it's not. Okay. So, we have to sometimes work around things like that, or um, usually what happens is we have limitations on what we can say, depending on what the messiness of the data. If it's just at one particular field that's messy or incomplete or something, we have to steer clear of that. I think in all my time, I've only given up on maybe a couple data sets that were so bad that we just couldn't do them. But we do spend a lot of time kind of bulletproofing on that front end, like what can we say, what can't we say, where's the, when I teach young people, I say, find the flaws before they find you because they will. You don't want to get them. So that's it. The question over there.
Hello. I was curious about because it seems like the task of the journalist is to basically translate things that could be complex to a lay audience. And so, with your experience translating some of the more technical skills like regressions and stuff like that to lay audiences, how was that process for you? Starting, over your career, starting with like relative to no
Yep.
experience with that to, over time being really well versed in it.
So when I first started out, I was so excited. Look at all these cool things I found, all these numbers. We got to put all of it in the story. And over the years, I've realized, no, we got to figure out kind of our star number. What's the most important thing here? And what's the simplest way I can explain this? How would I tell this to my grandma, for example? And just we spend a lot of time writing out sentences as simply as we can before we even start writing the story. What is it that we want to say? What is the key point? And trying to I tell people in particular, try writing it without looking at your notes. Like what would you say if you were saying it out loud? And that helps get it way down. And then look at your what numbers you're going to use. Pick the star one, and then is there anything that you have versus, this is just going to complicate things and make it confusing. I had a fight with an editor over a series in 2017. The star number was that um, it was about school choice and kids leave. It was the open enrollment, the same data actually. And we had this finding that, a huge share were opting to go somewhere else. And he wanted to dump in the middle of that sentence the number of kids in addition to the share. And I could not win that battle. And so when you read that paragraph now, it's got the share and then it's got the number of kids. And the reader just loses the whole point because you've thrown two numbers at them right back to back. And I'm still mad at that from 2017. He wrecked that star paragraph by forcing us to have some number that could have gone somewhere else. But do you see that idea, like really thinking carefully about what you have, particularly in the beginning, where you're trying to get the reader to stick with you and keep reading? Oh, you pick.
Um, thank you.
It's just online. You see it.
Thank you so much for this. I really appreciated this presentation. I used to feel like something that was very comforting about data was how concrete it was and how it was hard to argue with. And over time, I feel like sort of the public's idea of what's real and what's objective has shifted. And so I was wondering, how much pushback do you get from the Star Tribune audience when you publish something like this? Someone saying, I think you analyzed it wrong, or here's my analysis of it, or why don't you use these data? And how do you respond to that?
Well, we do get that. Not a lot, but we do get it. Whether I'm going to respond or not is going to depend on what they're saying. If they seem to be thinking that I made a mistake, like I truly just did something wrong, um, and I may respond with more methodology on how I did it. But if it really sounds ideological and they're just wanting to disagree with me, sometimes we've learned that we just can't engage on some of those because you just end up spending your whole day listening to someone yell at you for no reason. So whatever. But also I think I wish we could have trust that data is 100% foolproof, but we've learned that it's not. And with this new administration, increasingly it's not going to be foolproof. So, and I've encountered enough problems with data to know that it's not as well. Yes. Yeah, so overall, like journalism hiring overall is way down, but I do feel like data data journalism jobs are more in the mix, and we routinely see those jobs being advertised. I do not have a quantitative measure of this. This is simply me and maybe my biased look at the industry, but I also see that college students coming out with the data skills are getting jobs immediately, and the ones without are not. I see that consistently. So I think news organizations are seeing the value of data journalism. Like I said, I showed you that open enrollment thing. I just recently did an analysis of my team's work. Remember, I said the average story gets like 2,000 to 3,000 sessions. My team's average is 14,000. And that's across all the different kinds of stories you can possibly imagine. Even the little ones do way better than average. So, hiring managers are seeing that and hopefully doing it. So,
Okay. Thank you so much. You had mentioned, I forget your language, that you were like envious of us for our access to data. I guess I am on the flip side, I'm envious of your dissemination.
yeah.
What kind of you're learning R and GIS as researchers, what skills would you recommend for us
Writing for
the
the layperson.
writing? Okay.
So you got to remember that the journalists are lay people too. And so if you throw at us a really complicated academic paper without any of that higher level context, most reporters, especially if they don't have data skills, are just going to just, right? The other thing is whatever you want to you want to get disseminated, and hopefully journalists would help with that. The more you can bring it to today and today's newsworthiness, and highlighting why the key thing we take into account when deciding what to write about is why should readers care about this now? And the now is just as important as the why on that. So, for example, I was just this morning reading catching up on the Census Bureau's tip sheet that they put out every Friday, and they announced they're releasing a data set about 2023 economic data. And I'm like, nah, nope, I'm not even going to look at that. It's 2023. Things have changed so much. It's useless to me, right? So the now is super important, and bringing it down and short and sweet. That help? Okay. Anybody online asking questions? Make sure we don't forget them. No? They're quiet out there. Of journalism or just disseminating information. Oh, you've thrown me a hard one. I tend to be an optimist, so I'd like to hope that we will it, it will continue to be important. And the internet has been wonderful because it gives us a bigger platform, but it also has made a giant sea and morass of too much information and disinformation. So I feel like somewhere I hope that we come back. Like I feel like we're moving too far out in terms of disinformation and the sea morass of stuff. I wish I hope somehow we can come back, but I honestly do not know how. I do feel like though that readers um, really like to see things grounded in data. I think there's still a perception out there that data is more trustworthy than the humans. I'm not entirely sure that's the case. I think it's a little bit the case, but not 100%. but they do like to see that proof. As I mentioned, like with denied justice, the policymakers really wanted to see that data. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's such a hard one. We're in such awful times. I don't know. I'm just praying that we maintain access to data and we don't have this giant gaping hole in data. We already, you guys probably have already seen, almost every data set, the pandemic is just like wrecked it. So like right, a lot of times we do stuff, we're like, let's look at the last 5 years. We're at a point right now where it's like, no, we can't do the last 5. We got to go 8, 10. We got to get some pre-pandemic times, or we got to keep it to like the last 3, because those years, 2020, 2021, just wreaked havoc on almost every topic under the sun. And so then it's all weird, right? And now I fear we're going to have the same thing with the Trump administration. If they're cutting off access to data or things like that, we're going to have this gaping hole. What'll happen after these 4 years? I don't know. That's depressing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So you're picking up new data all the time and figuring out how to work with them efficiently under deadlines and understand their nuances. So like, what are the things that help you do that? Like what leaves you parking downhill on working with new data?
Like trying to learn it. Oh man, it's tough. It's tough. Like I said, I do call on topic experts and others a lot to make sure I understand it. We do have, a kind of a methodology for bulletproofing testing data sets. That's all you can really do. And then when we finish our analysis, putting it in front of the experts, the people we're writing about, and making sure everyone agrees that we didn't flub something up. So that's all we can do. Yeah, and on the short time frame, it's hard.
All right, we're out of time. Please join me in thanking Mary Jo once more.